Hey, everybody, welcome to another special episode of the Fantasy Fiends with the Indie Fantasy Addicts talking. What are we talking about today? Oh, right, we're talking about Dragon Riders. Oh, yeah. Of course, Eileen with her awesome costumes, bringing her A game. As for the rest of us who didn't dress up, we should be ashamed of ourselves, honestly. But I don't have any dragon paraphernalia around my house. I do have dragon slaying paraphernalia, but that's not what this show is about. So we'll get to that another time. But joining me are some truly amazing authors. And Eileen, you've already started us off so awesomely. So why don't you introduce yourself for the viewers?
Hi, I'm Eileen. I live in New Zealand, which is a long way away from most of you, and have a series of Dragon Rider books called Riders of Fire and a bunch of middle grade books for kids, some with dragons as well.
Very, very cool. And her rival for the month, Allegra Pescatore.
Hey folks, I'm in Pennsylvania, which is probably much closer than New Zealand. I have my debut where Shadows Lie has a whole ton of dragons of a lot of different kinds, some of which you can ride and some of which will try to eat you. So we'll get into that a bit later.
Ooh, fun. All right, Sarah.
Hi guys, I'm Sarah and I write YA fantasy lots of them have dragons in them.
Very cool. Last but not least, Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole Zoltack. I write all kinds of fantasy. I have a lot of series with dragons, and some of the dragons you really don't want to know.
That's cool. So I want to ask you guys this. When I think of Dragon Riders, I immediately think of Dragon Riders of Pern, right? That feels like the original. But do you think there is a version, like a fantasy novel or series before that introduced the concept of Dragon Riders, or was that like the OG?
To me, it's the hallmark, but there may be, our readers might know some that are earlier, but that seems to be the hallmark series, very long, protracted series that sort of kicked everything off. What do you think, Sarah?
Well, I agree with you. Also, I know that readers have very strong opinions about dragons, and they are adamant that Anne McCaffrey is the be-all and end-all Dragon Rider.
Now, here's a little bit of controversy right here. Lord of the Rings kind of introduced it first.
But not Dragon Riders.
The bad guys, the Nazgul, they ride.
Yes, I was about to say the Nazgul do ride. They're like fell beasts, but are they really dragons? Because we've established in Lord of the Rings canon that dragons are like Smaug. They're big, they're intelligent, whereas the beasts in Nazgul ride seem to be more like mounts. So are they actually dragons?
Ooh, check this out. So in the Silmarillion, Morgoth uses Balrogs mounted on dragons in several battles. Like, we're not just talking about Balrogs or dragons, but Balrogs riding dragons. Like that's kind of endgame right there, I feel.
Yeah,
it's a pretty formidable combination there. No, I remember having this debate with someone and me saying, well, of course he has dragon riders because the Nazgul ride dragons. And someone was like, no, they're not. Like, what do you think they are? That big screech. Sorry, I won't go into my Lord of the Rings imitations today.
That's all right. It was amazing.
Yeah. Gets a lot louder.
That's true. All right, so
what do you think?
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Felbeast, I don't know. I'm kind of agree that they're not really dragons, but I mean, to have Balrogs on them, that just like blows my mind.
I could not believe that I love that, the idea of a force that formidable, and then there's got to be someone able to defeat that because Morgoth got defeated. So it's like, what the hell could have taken out anyone with extreme Silmarillion knowledge who knows how they won? The Númenóreans won that. Oh, that would be awesome if they showed that in the new Lord of the Rings TV show. Just like a bunch of demons riding dragons. Damn, someone's got to send that message to those producers and get that in there.
Yes.
So I guess the first question is, what kind of dragon are your characters writing? Anybody, tell us a little bit about the dragons that you have in your world that people are writing.
Do you want to go, Allegra?
Sure, I can go. So I have various types of dragons in my world, but the ones that are being written are called mock dragons. They're not actually intelligent, talking people. They are, animals. They come in a whole bunch of different varieties, from feathered to scaled to fuzzy. And they grow to be about the size of a aerial horse. So they're not huge. They can have 1, maybe 2 people riding them if you hold on tight and don't let go and hope for the best. And they pretty much are endemic. There are different species in different geographic zones. Every different species kind of has a different method to riding them because they have very strong personalities. Some will try to bite you if they do not like you well enough. But yeah, it's a lot of different dragons, but none of them are talking back to you, which is always something I'm kind of want to write. So one day I will write like talky dragons because I want that snark.
I think that's one of the fun things that I enjoy about my series is giving each dragon an individual personality. You mentioned fluffy dragons, or fuzzy dragons. I have a fluffy dragon, excuse me, in one of my kids' books, a poor dragon who's fluffy and gets teased all the time. But yeah, in my main Riders of Fire series, I love the fact that, I've got a dragon that's got a really ridiculous sense of humor and likes to roast his rider all the time. And then there are other dragons that are more serious or, lots of different sort of personalities. And I know you have that too, don't you, Sarah?
Yeah, my dragons are like people in that they have personalities and are highly intelligent. Mine they communicate telepathically to each other and to a person if they choose to, but they really only like to talk to a person who's their rider, except for in extreme circumstances because they're arrogant and feel that people are kind of beneath them and they're only forced to work with them because they have to. I wrote 3 dragon series, so to make things a little different, I added little bits of lore to each new series. So my first one has dragons and they have different colors, and what color they are determines kind of what their role is in the world. So the purple ones are messengers, and the black ones defend cities, and the red ones are warriors, and the green ones are adventurers. The white ones are healers, and the yellow ones are diplomats. And then,
so kind of playing off the Dragonlance style, where each color has a specific purpose or power, essentially.
Exactly.
Love
then
it.
In the next series, I brought in female dragons, which we hadn't seen up until that point, and they are chameleons, so they can shift from color to color as they please, which kind of was a fun little device to throw in there. And then in my third series, we moved into underwater dragons, which were larger than the rest, although our protagonist was hanging out with a baby one, so he was not very large until towards the end.
He was very cute, though.
Oh, that's kind of you, Eileen.
So that plays off the whole Dragon Riders of Pern, where every dragon where the different colours have different roles in society, doesn't it? And I deliberately decided not to do that, so I used some of the same colours. I mean, there's a wide colour spectrum, but of course, when you're naming colours, they're sort of similar sometimes. So, but mine all have individual distinct personalities, and their colours don't really determine much. But I did have sea dragons come in at the end. So there's in my first book, Azara. I'm going to give too many spoilers again, Andy. I'm so bad at this. I'm so good at it. Anyway, they end up in the desert, and there's a little desert assassin who's badly abused by the other assassins, who in book 6 comes in to help win the war with her sea dragon. So actually in book 5, but in book 6 you get to see her story. I introduced sea dragons not intending to use them in a big way, and then her story was just too fascinating, so I added an extra book onto the series so we could tell her story. And I loved that. I loved exploring the underwater world. I used to dive, so it was really neat, and I got all my readers to name all the different types of creatures they wanted to see underwater, and it was so much fun writing those scenes. So yeah.
Very cool. So now, when you think dragons, here's a bit of a question that sort of shows a little bit about your origin, I suppose, as a person. Is when you think of dragons, do you think of the more Oriental style of dragon, in the sense that they are serpentine, some very magical creatures, or do you think of more the European style, in the sense that, like, I did some research on this year or two ago, and I found out that they were descended from wolves. Like the idea of dragons was taken from wolves. You see the actual like the tufts of hair on the dragon paws and like wolf claws, and they have like wolf heads and stuff. And so it's like the origin was from like France when wolves are attacking the villagers and stuff. They actually started telling the stories of these huge monsters, and they sort of morphed into dragons and stuff. But so like, what kind of dragons do you immediately think of when you hear the word dragon?
Should we go to Nicole?
I always think of immediately, I think the European. That's where my mind always goes to, like the huge, massive monsters, whatnot, with the huge wings and the 4 legs. And it's just, I just always, that's where my mind goes to immediately.
For me, it's very different. My father is an artist. He's a sculptor and a painter. And I grew up with this sculpture of a dragon right outside my door. And also this illustration of Farmer Giles of Ham. And in both of them, he made these like towering dragons with long beaks and this very bird-like physique with feathers. And so that was always like my dragon. Dragons have beaks, right?
Interesting.
But mine are definitely Western. I lived in Switzerland for 6 years, and there is a type of dragon over there called a Tatzelwurm. So I was once invited to write a story for a cryptology story. So it was all about monsters and things, and a guy who was collecting a menagerie of monsters. So I got to write a Swiss. It was a bit of a dark fantasy, so not my usual young adult, about the Tatzelwurm, and had to do a whole lot of research on the Tatzelwurm, which is this thing that sort of has a serpentine body with a wolf-like sort of head. So that fits in with what you're saying, Andy, but a lot smaller than what current dragons were. So that was quite fun to write. But generally in my series, they tend to be the European type dragons, although I'm not averse to exploring Asian dragons. We live quite close to Asia down here, and we have a lot of Asian influence in New Zealand. So yeah, that's quite fun as well.
Very cool. Very cool. I also think of the European style of dragons because I was exposed to that before growing up in Japan. Dragons aren't actually a very big part of the Japanese culture in the sense that that dragons are in, say, Chinese culture and lore and mythology. There is some, but it's very much like the sea serpent kind. You see it a lot in like the Japanese style of tattoos, like the real scaled sea serpent types with horns and stuff, but like no wings, anything like that. So it's very different, but I was exposed to the European style of dragon before I read a lot of the Japanese mythology and lore. But a question specifically, I guess, about the dragon writers is, so the one that I know best is Aragon, right? Where he bonds. It's like an emotional / magical bond with this dragon, like from an egg. The one Pern novel that I read, Dragon Drums, I think, where the kid couldn't sing. I don't even remember how he got, started writing the dragon. So I guess in your worlds, how do the writers and the dragons come together? Is it like choosing a horse? Like, that one looks good, I'll take that one? Or is it like a deeper, more interconnected thing?
Sarah has an interesting phenomenon with dragons. So why don't we get her to mention what happens in Dragon School?
Eileen keeps volunteering me before I'm ready. Maybe we can come back to me. Let me formulate my thoughts.
So mine have an imprinting bond. So it's like they meet their soulmate and they stare into each other's eyes, and then usually I use a lot of metaphorical imagery to actually demonstrate the bond. So if someone's really into art, they might see a spectrum of colors, or if somebody's a singer, they might hear the sweetest music. So I try and use what's specific to the character and the dragon. So it's slightly different, because if you're writing a lot of stories where people are imprinting with dragons, you don't want that. Well, I didn't want that experience to be very samey. So it's sort of samey but different for each person, so with their own personality and flavor in there. And it's like they've met the one. But however, my dragons can have more than one rider in a lifetime. In several of my stories, dragons have had riders pass away and then they imprint with someone new later, because they have longevity. They get to live a lot longer than us mere humans.
Cool. In mine, there's kind of different ways you end up with a dragon or on a dragon's back. Mostly if you're going to be like riding mock dragons as a lifestyle, you usually raise one from an egg, and you have a toddling little dragonette for about a year or two until they grow up, and they're very bonded to you, and they're very loyal, and they pretty much will follow you around anywhere. There are dragons that are just trained to be mounts. You can go to a stable and be like, yo, I want to rent a dragon, and they'll give you a dragon. But there are also feral mock dragons out in the wilderness, and in the book I do have two characters who come across one and are about to get eaten, and instead manage to get on the dragon's back and fly it away, and it is a very traumatic flight for everyone involved. It is not particularly fun, so usually just kind of back away from the feral ones.
I like it.
I have genetically engineered dragons pop up later in my series. The enemy is a guy who actually, Commander Zen's, came through from Earth in 2050 and was the son of genetic engineers who abused him and used him as an experiment. So he came through a world gate, and at some stage he develops dragons. But that's a massive spoiler. You can see them on one of my covers, so it's not too bad. So they're feral and, well, not feral, they're evil, and they're ridden by clones. I won't tell you what type. So that's a sort of a different aspect, and those dragons operate completely differently and have different technology embedded in them that enables them to have superior powers over the other dragons. So there's another type of dragon.
Very cool. Did Sarah already go? Not yet.
I saw Nicole's mic unmuted, so I was just waiting on her.
Oh, okay.
All right, with my dragons, they're very intelligent, whatnot, and so they have to basically, it's almost more like the dragons and humans pick each other, and they have to form a bond almost through friendship, whatnot. And when a dragon rider once they're picked by the dragon, that's when the dragon rider is able to access magic through their staff. So it's the bond amplifies because the dragon has magic by itself, but for a human to have one, they have to have a dragon, and then they can use their staff for magic, and it comes about because of the strength and the bond of friendship.
Interesting.
So for mine, the riders come to, in the first series, the riders come to dragon school where they're taught to ride dragons. And on your very first day there, you get to choose from the dragons who are available to you. So they go along and they pick, and if you wanted to be a warrior riding a dragon, then you're going to pick a red one because that's what those people do. Or a healer who's going to ride a dragon, then you'll pick a white one because that's what they do, kind of thing. But if none of your color is available, you're just stuck with whatever you get, kind of thing. Only in my first book, my protagonist, she hears a voice in her mind, and it's the dragon speaking to her. And he highly recommends that she choose him.
I like it. Now, a question from the audience. Are dragons the top of the food chain, or are there other more dangerous creatures in your world?
Absolutely top of the food chain. You do not want to mess with one.
And these aren't the mock dragons, right? There are real dragons as well.
Both. The mock dragons are the top of the animal kingdom food chain, and then there are dragon gods who are definitely the top of every food chain, and if you piss one off, your whole continent might go poof. So just don't mess with dragons.
Very cool.
They sound way too powerful. I have genetically engineered monsters called Tharuks who run around. They're bipedal, so they have 2 legs. There's 4, and they have faces like warthogs, and they're furry with big claws. Dragons trump them, but they cause a lot of havoc in the realm. They're busy enslaving people and dragging them off to a death camp where they perform. They go into mines, and nobody knows what they're mining in book 1. So I won't give that spoiler away, but by the end of book 5 and 6, you find out exactly what they're mining and why it's so important. But yeah, so the dragons are top of the food chain, but there are other creatures creating huge havoc for the realm.
Very cool.
I have some weird sunlight playing across my face, so I'm just going to have a fiddle with my drape. So my picture may go weird. It's just that the sun's moved. It's early morning here in New Zealand. Come on, guys.
Mine are not the top of the food chain. They're very high up there, but we have dust demons that are bigger and stronger, and we have plenty of other creatures that are equivalent in both size and power that my dragons have to fight and take on. They end up like they're powerful enough, but there's plenty of other things. There's golems in one book which are as powerful as the dragon, some of which fly. And there's a creature that's kind of like a giant squid but goes through the air that is equivalent in power. And I think I mentioned the dust demons, right? Mm-hmm. Yes.
Very cool.
I will probably say that dragons are really close to the top, if not the top of the food chain. But there's a lot of other fantasy creatures in the world that are as powerful. There's phoenixes, there's giants, there's all kinds of baddies.
Very cool. So then I guess the next question is, are there any other creatures besides dragons that can attack the dragons in the air? Nicole, you mentioned phoenixes. Sarah, you mentioned dust demons, which I assume they can go up. Are there griffins in your world? Are there, I don't know, other things that can like aerial combat? Is that a thing that happens in your books and in your world, or is that not, I suppose?
So mine happens with the shadow dragons, which are the genetically engineered ones. So that is sort of dragon to dragon combat, but they have beams that come out of their eyes that can slice other dragons. So which go a little bit further than firepower. So that makes for interesting combat.
Whoa, like Superman eyes?
Like lasers, yeah.
Ooh.
In mine, you can do dragon v dragon, but the real threat to a dragon in the air and its rider is a magic user. The specific mages are called rifters, and where shadows lie, have the ability to absorb kinetic energy to refill their own battery of power and then shove it back at you, so they can actually take the kinetic energy out of a dragon in flight and just make that dragon fall out of the sky. So if you're going up against magic and you are in a dragon, you could be in a world of trouble.
Wow.
Not all my dragons are good. It depends on who's riding them and what their political aspirations are. So there's plenty of dragon on dragon in flying madness and battles and that kind of a thing.
So I mentioned the Phoenixes in my Dragon Rider series, and then I have another series that is for middle grade, and that actually has dragons versus wyverns. So that's a huge, long aerial battle, and that was a lot of fun to write.
That is always fun. Wyverns are an awesome thing to throw up against the dragons.
Right.
So, okay, what are the audience is asking more specifically about, like the combat? So in aerial combat, how do you prevent the rider from being targeted and injured? Are there saddles that they use? Because like, I don't remember what I was watching or reading, but it's like, you know, if you ride a dragon bareback, the scales will just like slice you to shit. So it's like, how do you do aerial combat in your stories?
So my riders are strapped into a fairly substantial saddle that has a lot of different straps and kind of a harness that's not unlike a climbing harness with a chest harness attached as well. And they're strapped in pretty good. Basically, the rider can be targeted by other dragons, but the dragon they're on needs to be savvy enough to try and turn to get their belly armor up in time to defend both dragon and rider. And the rider needs to be able to tuck in the back there to make use of that belly armor before they get splashed with fire. Otherwise, parts of them are going to get singed or burnt off that are hanging around the edges.
Damn.
I mean, part of that, there's mine in combat if you want to see it's on Dragon Strike with the shadow dragons. But I have mages that can ride dragons as well. So they blast fire from their fingertips, they're elemental mages, and they use elemental energy. So they pull the energy from the environment, sort of like I'm pulling these sun stripes across my face, which I can't seem to eliminate. And also, arrows, and the riders shoot a lot of arrows from Dragonback, and the dragons engage in combat. People get hurt, people die, it's a part of life. It's a part of battle. So I think that makes for fun is actually not having everybody invincible. I've got one character, Kirian, and he's a practical joker, and he's always pranking. So he does stunts from Dragonback in the middle of battle, and everybody's like, no, and half the time the stunts work, and half the time they fail miserably and cause chaos. So that makes him a really fun character, because whenever he comes on the scene, everybody's like, what's he going to do now? And is it going to be good or bad? So that makes there's a lot of fun that you can have. So those are my dragons.
Very cool. Let me ask you all this then. So the presence of magic obviously has shaped the world, shaped the culture and society. How has the presence of dragons affected your world? It's not just, okay, we got to have city defenses in case a dragon comes and attacks. There's got to be, how have you written dragons, the effect of having dragons into your society?
Well, I think the obvious one that I think almost every world with dragons has is the ability to deliver messages quickly and for information to cross whole continents way faster than a person on horseback could. And that is just such a huge change to fantasy worlds where, generally you're limited by this, how fast can a person and a horse move? Dragons are going as the crow flies in the air. So that's the main thing, at least for me, is the presence of dragons means that news can move. And that is huge when armies are moving and trying to maneuver and trying to, flank each other. It's makes it all more difficult.
That's funny. And when you said that, I feel like a dragon would be like, I ain't no mail carrier. Like way too proud and arrogant to deliver mail, something so mundane. You hear, I have shattered kingdoms. I have ruined empires. I will not deliver your mail.
They do it by telepathy, Andy.
Oh, well, you see, that was not said, or I didn't hear it.
My dragons, the main character's dragon is the purple one that delivers messages. That's literally what they do. They are dragon mailmen.
See, if they're like dragons, sort of like the gods, each of the gods of the Greek mythology, let's say, has their own specific purpose. Hermes, it's not Hermes, is beneath, delivering mail is not beneath Hermes. It's literally his job. I can see that. But if it's like, just imagine Smaug, someone coming up to him and saying, please deliver this mail somewhere else. It would not work.
Yeah. To be fair, my actual dragons, my godly dragons, definitely don't deliver mail. But, the truth behind them is that they're just nerds playing God who decided that dragons were a cool shape to be. So, really, nerd rules apply. Their dragons are very big, they're very awesome, and don't actually have that much as far as teeth.
So my dragons, sorry, I'm not mailmen. They protect the realm. So it's called Dragon's Realm, and they protect the humans from threats. So there are pirates, there are all sorts of other things in the world that they want to protect them from. It's quite interesting because now that I've written Riders of Fire, I'm going back to write the prequel, which is Riders of Fire Dragon Masters. And so I'm suddenly going, the main threat in the world of Riders of Fire was Commander Zen's and his armies of Tharoks, and now here I am writing pre-Tharok before they come into the world. So it's an interesting way to find out what all the new threats could be that plagued the society before the ultimate threat came through the world gate. So yeah, that's lots of fun.
When I started writing Dragon School, my thought was, what if someone wrote a story about someone who's not a protagonist, about a side character? And so that's why I chose, everyone in a story has a disabled friend, but what if you have the disabled main character and that's the person we're following? And for that reason...
I need to read your books.
Oh, thank you.
I also have a disabled main character.
And for that reason, I thought dragons should be the same thing. What if it's not the great, amazing fighting one? What if it's the one that has the weird friend role? And I always thought that was kind of a fun play. Yeah.
So Jada Fisher, who's a husband and wife team who write the Brindle Dragon series and a whole bunch of other dragon books, their main character, Iced, is also disabled, but you don't find out until the end of the first book exactly what her disablement is. So that's quite cool. And then you look back and you go, oh, of course, I should have got it. So, yeah, that's really fun.
Nicole, what about you?
Basically, in my country, the kingdom, the dragons and the humans, they all work together to protect the realm. You know, everything is trying to keep peace. You know, there's a threat of war outside, so they have to band together and try to protect everyone. So that's basically the main thrust of it.
Now, something that I find amusing about dragons is that you can kind of go any direction with their personalities, right? What kind of personality did you imagine or do you picture when you're writing your dragons? Like, is it just like this, big thing that's a lumbering, super powerful being that's kind of done? Everyone's done that. So what kind of unique flavor did you give the dragons?
Well, mine are entirely based on our dogs. So one of them regularly gets referred to as lumbering pain beast because he has not got the memo that he's getting bigger and that he can't just like jump off your sternum and not crack a rib. And I have a teeny tiny little baby one who is just basically a puppy biting everything she can reach with her mouth. But no, for me, it's absolutely, I look at the animals in my life and I try to just insert as much of that joy and bounce and also stubbornness into my dragons as possible.
Like Allegra, my various dragon personalities were based almost entirely on dogs I've owned.
The main dragon rider, her dragon, he won't shut up. Like he's the most talkative dragon like you would ever think of, and he's completely into gossip, and he's like giving the latest dish about this dragon and that dragon and everything. He just loves to talk. He's very colorful personality.
Very cool.
So one of my main characters, Roberto, was captured by Commander Zens and was trained. Oh, we did that podcast where we talked about terrible parenting, didn't we? It was like he had a father who sold him to the enemy when he was young. So he went through a lot of abuse and terrible stuff. So his dragon rescues him from Death Valley and they bond, but Erob is always roasting him. He's always giving him a hard time. He knows he's been through a lot and that he can handle his sense of humor. So my dragon riders and dragons, the dragons tend to be, because they're complementary partners in life, they tend to actually reflect the rider. So Kyrian, who's a stuntman, always doing crazy stuff, and prankster, he has a dragon who's really adventurous and loves the crazy stuff he does. Zarusha is the dragon who's the queen of the realm, and Azara is her rider. And Zarusha is quite regal and queenly and sometimes makes mistakes, and Azara's rebellious and goes against her sometimes. But they sort of suit each other as well. So it just depends upon, what sort of personalities do you give your characters, Andy? It's like saying the same thing. There are as many different personalities that you can apply to a dragon in my world as you can to a human being. So yeah, it's endless.
I agree with Eileen on that one.
All right. What weaknesses do your dragons have?
Zarusha's arrogant because she's the queen sometimes. She makes mistakes. So she forbids Azara to go after one of the other main characters when something dire happens to them, and Azara decides with the cheeky, the one who's always roasting Roberto, she decides with him that she'll go after Roberto with him instead. So yeah, it's quite cool.
Dragons don't sneak very well because they're so very large. And it makes it very hard. If you have any kind of a scene where you need stealthiness, it can be a challenge.
Not the stealth weapon of choice.
Yeah. That's a fair point.
My dragons in the world are fire dragons. So one thing that they have to deal with actually is a magical storm. So, rain and fire is not going to be any good. So that was one aspect that they had to deal with. That was definitely a weakness for the dragons.
For me, dragons very much belong in their own climates in mine. So if you take a desert dragon and put him up on a glacier, they're going to freeze their toes off. They're going to be very cranky, and they will probably die eventually of exposure. And same, in reverse. So very much for mine, there's a limited range where a dragon can be and not start, having some serious weaknesses.
My sea dragons are always moaning about the lack of salt water when they go into the alpine terrain. And, this lake it's fine, but it's just not quite as salty as we used to. And they're complaining about the fact that they have to eat goats instead of fish.
That's funny. Sarah, you were talking about belly armor. I assume that's the only part of the dragon that they have a weakness.
So my dragons are they're covered all over in pretty good scales, but other dragons obviously can penetrate those scales. Like sometimes one will bite the other's neck and break it and kill them that way, or that sort of thing, or they can bite a tail or a limb off or tear a wing. I wouldn't say they're particularly susceptible to people, but mine are often fighting other dragons or magical creatures, which are, pretty capable of biting through a dragon's armor.
That's
my dragon scales. Oh, sorry, Andy. Go.
No, I was gonna say that's a lot of bite power right there.
Large jaws. My dragon scales are not impervious to fire, so they can be harmed by anyone, by mages, by dragons. I also have a weapon which Commander Zen's develops in battle, where he can turn the loyalty of a dragon by using this weapon. So, they get shot full of arrowheads that burrow into them and control them with computer chips. So, because he's come through from the future, so he has tech that they have no idea about. So that makes battle really interesting, because suddenly your enemies, your friends become enemies, and the enemy's army increases, and you don't know who you're fighting because the shadow dragons are all black, but suddenly you've got other dragons turning against you in the middle of battle. So it's lots of fun.
Interesting. Well, I guess if there's any more questions from the audience, drop them here. Do you ladies have questions for each other?
Eileen, your tech arrows sound really cool. Do you deliver tech by any other means into your enemies?
No, that's one of his main tech weapons, as well as his army, because they're all genetically engineered. So there's this interesting, because it's a medieval society, you can never actually say genetically engineered from the point of view of the characters. So that's coming out. Now, IFA Villains Anthology, I'm giving you the backstory for Commander Zen. So that's quite fun. So you get to see all the tech stuff in 2050, which is not that far away now, but that he does, that he brings through to Dragon's Realm. But yeah, the Tharuks are all tech weapons, theoretically, because they're all genetically engineered. But yeah, they just come across as monsters. So the medieval guys are saying things like, he grows them the way we grow plants, he must take cuttings or something, and they don't understand how this stuff happens. But yeah, there you go.
For those of you who have bonds with dragons, can those bonds be broken? Can there be a disagreement that shatters the trust between a dragon and their rider?
That's really interesting, and it's something that I would want to play with in a future book. But in the world so far, that hasn't been an issue. But I think it was Eileen who said that some of the dragons live a really long time, and that sometimes they'll pick another human, another rider, whatnot. In my world, dragons tend to live 3 times as long as humans. And occasionally they will pick a second rider. I think there was only one dragon ever that picked 3. Because the bonds that they make with humans is so strong that sometimes it can actually last even beyond the human's death, so that the dragon can't bond with another human.
My dragons die shortly after their humans are killed. They rot from the inside out, which kind of sucks, So the bond is kind of an important thing to maintain and keep. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself rotting from the inside out.
And you want to keep your rider alive, obviously. So that's similar to Aragon, where when the rider dies, the dragon dies. So
I'll admit something. I'm pretty good these days at reading in my genre and reading pretty broadly. But before I started writing my Dragon Rider series, I made it a point not to read or watch any shows or books surrounding it. So I'm surprised by how often someone says, "Oh, it's like such and such." And I'm like, really, it is? Isn't that nice? So I guess people tend to land on ideas just naturally that are the same. After that experience, I've decided that I will read books in a genre that I plan to write in substantially so that I can never again be accused of stealing anyone's idea.
I wasn't accusing you. I was just saying there are similar tropes.
Oh, no. I mean more people in my advertisements who say, this is too much like Pern.
Yeah, I've had people say, I've got a review that says it rivals Pern, and I've got people say, oh, I love this because of Pern, and then I've got a whole stack of reviews saying, this is nothing like Pern. Why have people said this? And, I think there are so many elements and tropes in the Dragon Rider genre, and you're going to pick some that resonate with some readers and some that resonate with others. We were asking in Indie Fantasy Addicts recently, whether people like their dragons good or evil, and there were a whole lot of people that like them big, badass, evil, and there are a whole lot of people that love the good, and then there's some that like both. So, we write to please readers that like the sort of tropes that we enjoy, and we're going to find a mix of readers who agree and disagree about what parts of our books are similar to others. So, yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. Are your dragons magical, or do they have magic, or are they just big old beasties?
Mine are mostly non-magical. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, they're just big old beasties with telepathic ability to speak.
So they just fly and they can use telepathy.
And they can breathe fire, which we've discussed in IFA as possibly only magically capable. I think there was some big fight between me and DW about that maybe a year and a half ago.
Well, so on a previous podcast, we did figure out, we had a biologist come on and explain how dragons could actually breathe fire. Potentially, obviously, they need the proper glands and all of that. But magical fire is just so much easier.
So Anne McCaffrey has dragons chew sulfur rock, which gives them the ability to then blast fire. And so that's one of their limitations in her world, is that they have to go and mine the rock and get the rock and chew enough rock to be able to produce fire.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really clever. However, mine just breathe fire. And I guess in terms of the magic happens between dragon and rider, where a rider's ability, so they're called riders of fire when they bond and when they reach a particular level where they've got such an amazing trusting bond with their dragon that the rider is able to harness some of the dragon's power. So we have riders be able to make magical leaps onto dragonback from the ground in a couple of instances, or harness the dragon's power and run way faster than what anyone thinks they'd possibly be able to. So in terms of magic, those are some of the magical abilities, but I guess any beast that big that can fly must have some sort of magic, right? I have a lot of teenagers who like to discuss with me and they always give me links to sites that prove that dragons couldn't exist because they're way too big to be able to be carried through the air, and what are their bones made of, and are they hollow like birds, and we have all these different discussions. So that's always fun to go through some of those scientific aspects that either are or aren't in your mythology and see what's plausible.
Very cool.
My mock dragons are just creatures. They don't even breathe fire. They are literally just flappy beasts. Very big toothed, but animals. My dragon gods have some pretty incredible and huge powers, although they are very limited in their scope. They can only do pretty much one-trick ponies. But I do think that there is something kind of just magical about dragons, just the existence of these big beasts, and there's something very kind of soft magic to me always about they couldn't really exist in nature. It would be very difficult. So even I think that they do. I would love to think that they do. That's about the limit of mine.
My kids are always asking, so do you really think dragons are real, Mum? And I'm like, of course they are. I write about them.
Nicole, what about you?
My dragons have magic, and then the bond between the dragon and the dragon rider allows the human to be able to have magic as well that they can use through their staff that they wield.
What kind of magic do your dragons have?
For them, they can breathe fire, and they can, to some extent, they can increase their senses, especially their eyesight, so that way they can see, at night, so they can be able to see anything. They can see further than if they don't use their magic. They, different stuff like that.
Do any of you have shape-shifting dragons? This is a question from the audience.
I do another series of dragons that is not dragon riders. Well, there is one that's kind of a spoil.
It's a different kind of ride.
No. All my stuff is YA or YA friendly, so no. But the first book is about. So basically, the world is set up in that humans are all slaves, and there's fire dragons in the north, and then in the south there's the ice dragons, and in the middle there's the ocean, so it's the sea dragons. So the first book is centered about a teenage boy who discovers that he's actually a hybrid. So he can turn into a fire dragon, and then the second book is about a girl that finds out that she's a sea dragon, and then the third book is about a boy who finds out that he's an ice dragon, and then the fourth book is about a war between all the humans and all the dragons, and it's a lot of chaos.
So I am in the middle of just actually doing the final edits on a story that's called Snow and Red, which is based on the fairy tale of Snow White and Rose Red. And it's about two girls who have powers. One has ice powers and one has fire powers, but they have no idea why they have them, and they're living in contemporary in the modern world. So, and they meet two boys who happen to be dragon shapeshifters, but they're half frozen in their dragon and human state. So they look like humans with scales down one half of their bodies, basically. And so the girls assume they're tattoos. They get attacked in an alley one night. The guys swoop in, run in to save them because they can't fly. So all the dragon shifting abilities are actually frozen. We are just debating whether we end up opening that up into a series called The Dragon Shifters Horde, or whether we just leave it as a standalone. It's a part of a big anthology called Enchanted Kingdoms, which is 22 novels about all based on fairy tales, and a few of them have dragons in them. So that should be fun. Looks like we've lost Sarah.
Yeah, she said she had to jump off to go pick up her kids from school.
Yeah.
So
my kids are just going to school, so it's sort of time zones.
So one last question before we have to jump off. How do you handle the problem of feeding your dragons?
So many resources. Dragons usually actually don't live near cities. In mine, because of that exact problem, you need a large amount of land and potential food. Most of the dragons that I follow actually live on tropical islands and fish. So they spend most of the day just kind of swooping down and eating fish. But there are basically whole industries and infrastructures just made to getting enough meat for these dragons to sustain them, which kind of does reduce the number in the general population of how many you train and keep, and also how many you hunt in the wild to keep their population down, to not have them, eat your entire flock of sheep because they had a bad day.
That's pretty cool. Dragons creating jobs since, Imperial 203 or something. Great motto for the pro dragon platform right there. Nicole, what about you? How do you solve the problem of feeding all your dragons?
Basically, the dragons they do that on their own time. It's not something really that they've had to have a problem or an issue in which that the humans have to help them. They're just able to go off and they just eat what they want. For the most part, they will, because they have good relationships with the humans, they're not going to go and eat all of the human livestock on them, so that they'll go out. They typically tend to go to like the mountain areas and eat the stuff there, because a lot of the humans basically don't really live in the mountains. So that's where the dragons tend to go to be able to get their food that they need.
Interesting.
So I have dragons that hunt, like Nicole. So mine just go off and hunt a goat now and then. Or in Dragon's Hold, it's like a basin. There's a ring of mountains, and there's a basin, and that's where a lot of the dragons live. There are others living all around Dragon's Realm, though. And in that area, there's a whole wilderness at one end where there's a lot of goats and Steinbock. I don't know what the word is in English. And they are, like mountain goats. And the dragons hunt those. But the people living at Dragon's Hold only eat meat when they have a big feast. So when there's something to celebrate, so they leave enough of the animal population for the dragons. And the dragons only need a goat like once every 3 days or something. They're like lions where they have a big feed and then they run off their energy for a long time.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are coming to the end of the show. So why don't we do the most important thing and tell people where they can find you and your books? For those of you who are not yet familiar with Sarah Wilson's book, you can find her at sarahklwilson.com. Her books are all on Amazon at Sarah K.L. Wilson. And I think she's also on Instagram under Sarah K.L. Wilson. Right. So she just look for that name. You'll find all of her stuff. She can't be here to pitch her own book. So I know they're awesome. Go check them out. Allegra, where can people find your books?
Sure. My books are on Amazon at present. I'm about to put them up all over the place, though, so they'll be popping up everywhere. You can find me on my website at authorallegra.com. You can also find me on YouTube at Plot Mom, and on Mondays, I'm on Andy's D&D show, Deranged and Questing, which you should absolutely be watching.
Tonight, actually, in about 5 hours, we are going to, I don't know what we're going to do. It's going to be insane, but
it's going to be great.
Very cool. Nicole, where can people find you?
My books are all on Amazon, and you can learn more about them on my website, www.nicolezoltack.com.
Woohoo! And any other platforms other than website and Amazon?
You can basically look up anywhere on Nicole Zoltack. What's really, really cool about having an unusual name like Zoltack is if you look up Nicole Zoltack, everything that comes up is me. So,
right? It's great.
It's amazing.
Very cool.
Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Pinterest, I'm on everywhere.
Very cool. And Eileen?
Hi. Eileen Miller is actually quite a common name, which I never would have thought. So apparently there's a famous artist. There's a woman at my gym, in my local community, who has even stolen my children once. Someone combined our memberships and put all of my kids onto her profile. So that was a bit worrying. But anyway, I'm at eileenmillerauthor.com. And I'm on Amazon under Eileen Mueller. I have a Facebook group called Riders of Fire, which we started in March, and that's now got about 1,300 people in it. Yeah, I know. It was like, wow, a lot of people like dragons.
That's awesome.
So there's usually dragonly fun happening in there most days. And lots of people are posting dragon stuff as well in there. So that's fun. That's called Riders of Fire, Eileen Muller's Fan Zone. So that's a big, long name. But at eileenmillerauthor.com, you can sign up and get my free books, Bronze Dragon and Silver Dragon, and any other free books that I'm putting out. I've got a few things coming up. And also I'm on Amazon, Pinterest, and Instagram under Eileen Miller Author. Yeah.
Very, very cool. And thank you, ladies, so much for joining me for this, what has been a fun hour of talking about dragons and dragon writers. For you who are watching, go check out their books, their websites, their social medias, follow, do all the things that you know to do. And we will be back tonight for Deranged and Questing on Twitch, 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Boom, got that one right. And then Thursday night, a special episode of the Fantasy Fiends show with just Stevie and myself, which is going to be full of me roping Stevie back onto whatever topic we're talking about. So check in for that, 5:30 Pacific Daylight Time. Have an awesome Monday, an awesome week. Goodbye.
Have fun riding dragons.